Chapter 4. Shook Ones. The night after, Vinny's warning stretched on forever, as if time had slowed just to torment him. Jack lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, eyes wide open but glazed over with exhaustion. Sleep had become a distant luxury, replaced with a constant state of anxiety, a gnawing, sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Nicky Giordano's blood-streaked face staring back at him. Jack had never imagined that killing someone, even accidentally, would feel like this. The movies always made it seem quick, something you did and then moved on from, like flipping a switch. But that wasn't how it worked in the real world. In the real world, the moment you took a life, it clung to you like a stain you could never scrub off. A car horn blared outside, flagging him upright. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly 3 a.m. The streets outside were mostly silent, except for the occasional hum of a passing car or the faint sound of a distant conversation. Brooklyn at night had a strange way of amplifying every sound, making even the smallest noise feel like it was echoing inside your head. Jack shifted under the covers, restless. He could hear his mother's faint snoring from her bedroom down the hall, a small comfort in the chaos that had become his life. She had no idea what he had done. How could she? She had always believed he was better than this, that he could rise above the temptations of the streets. But now, he was deeper in than he had ever thought possible. Even worse, he had dragged his childhood buddies into this. Speaking of which, his phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up in the darkness. It was a text from Frankie. "We need to talk." Jack stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Not now. Tomorrow." Frankie didn't respond, and Jack wasn't surprised. Frankie had likely been beside himself since the incident. They all would be in a state of panic. But Frankie had always been the one who took things head-on. He wanted to talk about it, to confront it. Jack couldn't. Not yet. Not when the weight of everything was still crushing him. He rolled over, clutching his pillow tighter. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were all living on borrowed time, that at any moment, someone was going to knock on his door and drag him out into the cold night. Sal Giordano would find out eventually. That was inevitable. Mob secrets never stayed hidden for long, especially when blood was involved. Vinny had told him to keep his head down, to lay low. And Jack trusted him, or at least, he wanted to. But even Vinny couldn't control everything. Sooner or later the truth would come out, and when it did, everyone involved would have to go. The next day was another blur of tension and paranoia. Jack went about his usual routine, helping his mother with breakfast, heading out to work his shift. But everything felt off. Every time someone glanced his way, he wondered if they knew, if they had heard the whispers, if they could see the guilt written all over his face. Even when he walked to work, the streets felt different. It wasn't just the cold bite of autumn in the air, it was something else, something darker. The people who passed him on the sidewalk, regulars from the neighborhood, faces he had known for years, looked different too. Suspicious. As if they were watching him, waiting for him to slip up. But that was just his imagination. Paranoia was the worst part of all this. The constant feeling that everyone knew the secret he was trying to keep buried. When Jack arrived at the restaurant, Tony was waiting outside. He had promised to give him a lift home that day. His friend looked pale, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. Jack hadn't seen Tony since the night they dumped the gun in the river, and now that he was standing in front of him, he didn't know what to say. "You look terrible," Jack muttered, as Tony slammed the passenger side door on his way in. Tony glanced over to him, his face tight with stress. "Yeah, well, I haven't exactly been sleeping much." Join the club. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The Brooklyn air was enough to fill any awkward silences as Jack moved through the streets. But it was a fragile kind of quiet, the kind that could shatter at any moment. Jack could feel the tension radiating off his friend, and could see the fear in his eyes too. "We need to talk to Frankie," Tony said finally, his voice low. "He's losing it. He won't stop calling me, texting me. He's not handling this well." Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "What the hell does he want us to do? We can't fix this. It's done." Tony shook his head. "He wants to go to Vinny. He thinks he can help us." Jack frowned. Vinny already knows. He told me to lay low. Told me he'd take care of it. Thanks for telling us, Tony said frustratingly. So, he's looking into it, huh? Well, Frankie will want to know what Vinny's plan is. He's worried sick. We all are, Tony said. Jack turned onto a quiet street, excelling with greater speeds. Of course Frankie would be scared. They were all scared. But going to Vinny again wouldn't change anything. If anything, it would make things worse. Vinny was already walking a fine line, trying to keep them out of Sal Giordano's crosshairs. Pushing him for more answers wouldn't help now. I'll talk to Frankie, Jack said finally, though he didn't know what he would say. He hadn't seen Frankie since the night of the incident either, and part of him was afraid to face his friend, afraid of what he might see in his eyes, the guilt, the fear, the anger. Tony nodded, though he didn't look convinced. We need to figure this out, Jack, before it's too late. After dropping Tony off at his house, Jack made his way to Frankie's apartment. He hadn't been there in weeks, not since everything had started spiraling out of control. The building was old, the kind of place where the paint was peeling off the walls and the stairwell smelled like damp and cigarettes. Frankie's place was on the 3rd floor, a cramped 2-bedroom apartment that he shared with his older sister, Lena. It was actually her apartment, but she was kind enough to let him stay there on account of him being kicked out of his mother's house. Jack knocked on the door, his heart pounding all the while. After a moment, the door creaked open, and there stood Frankie. His friend looked worse than he had ever seen him. His eyes bloodshot, his skin pale, his clothes wrinkled like he hadn't changed in days. Jack, Frankie muttered, stepping aside to let him in. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in a while. He stepped inside, glancing around the small apartment. It was cluttered with old furniture and piles of laundry, but it felt empty. Lena wasn't home, which was probably a good thing. Jack didn't know how much Frankie's sister knew about what had happened, but it was better if she stayed out of it. Frankie closed the door behind him and gestured toward the small kitchen table. He sat down, feeling the tension in the air like a thick fog. Frankie leaned against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes darting toward the floor. I've been trying to get a hold of you, Frankie said after a long pause, his voice low. I know, Jack replied. I've been trying to figure things out. Frankie scoffed. Yeah? Figure things out? You think that's gonna fix this? We killed a man, Jack. Do you get that? We killed him. His jaw tightened. He didn't need Frankie to remind him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Nikki's lifeless body lying on the floor, the blood pooling around him. It was an accident. An accident? Frankie's voice rose, his fists clenching at his sides. That doesn't matter. Nikki's dead, and we're responsible. You think Sal Giordano is going to care that it was an accident? Jack looked down at the table, his stomach twisting with guilt. He didn't have an answer for that. In the Mafia world, a dead family member was a dead family member, and someone had to pay for it. Vinny's going to handle it, he said, though the words felt hollow. He wasn't even sure if he believed them anymore. Vinny had promised to protect them, but how much could his cousin really do against a man like Sal? Frankie pushed off the counter, pacing back and forth in the small kitchen. I can't just sit here and wait for something to happen. I need to know what's going on out there. So far nobody knows nothing, he confirmed. But Vinny said to lay low. That's all we can do right now. Frankie stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. You trust him? You really think he's going to stick his neck out for us? Jack didn't answer right away. He wanted to believe that his cousin would protect them. Family was everything in their world, and Vinny had always looked out for him. But Frankie's doubts had a way of worming their way into Jack's mind, feeding the fear that was already growing there. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, but we don't have a choice. Frankie stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. We need to talk to him. I need to hear it from him. I need to know he's really got our backs. Jack nodded reluctantly. He didn't want to drag Vinny into this any more than he already had, but he understood Frankie's need for answers. They were all hanging by a thread, and that thread was starting to fray. I'll set up a meeting. Later that evening, Jack called Vinny. His cousin answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and businesslike. Johnny, what's going on? We need to talk, Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. Frankie's not handling things well. He needs to hear from you. We all do. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Jack could hear the faint sound of music playing in the background. Vinny was probably at one of the bars, surrounded by his crew, doing what he always did, keeping things running smoothly. "All right," Vinny said finally. "Meet me at the old warehouse on Park Avenue. Midnight." Jack hung up the phone, his stomach twisting with nerves. Midnight. It felt ominous, like the kind of meeting where decisions were made that couldn't be undone. At midnight, Jack, Frankie, and Tony made their way to the warehouse. The building was old and abandoned, a relic of Brooklyn's industrial past, now just another forgotten corner of the city where deals were made in the shadows. Vinny was already there when they arrived, leaning against the hood of his car, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his leather jacket. He looked calm, but Jack could see the tension in his cousin's posture, the way his eyes darted toward the shadows as if he was expecting someone to emerge from the darkness. "Over here," Vinny said, his voice low and serious. He nodded toward Frankie and Tony. "You guys okay?" Frankie crossed his arms over his chest, his expression hard. "No, we're not okay." Vinny sighed, pushing off the car and walking toward them. "Listen, I know things are tense right now, but I told you, I've got this under control." "Under control?" Frankie's voice rose, anger lacing his words. "We killed Sal Giordano's nephew. He's a captain. How the heck is that under control?" Vinny's face showed displeasure at Frankie's tone, but he understood the situation. "I'm handling it. I've already talked to Donnie. We're working on a solution." "What kind of solution?" Tony asked quietly, his voice trembling. Vinny glanced at Tony, then back at Jack. "We're gonna spin the story. It'll take the heat off you guys." "How you gonna do that?" "We already know from our people up there that Nicky was into it with some guys from East New York," Vinny explained. "They've been at it for months. We're gonna make it look like this was a drug-related hit from them." Jack felt a surge of relief, though it was quickly followed by a wave of guilt. He didn't like the idea of pinning this on someone else, but what choice did they have? If Sal Giordano found out the truth, they were dead. "What do we have to do?" Frankie asked, his voice tight with suspicion. Vinny's expression darkened. "You stay quiet. You don't talk to anyone. And you stay close to me." Outside the abandoned warehouse, the chilly night air was thick with tension. The distant hum of the city was a low backdrop to the more immediate sounds of their strained breaths. Vinny stood solemnly, his gaze flickering between the shadowed corners of the deserted street and the faces of his younger companions. Jack's brow furrowed under the weight of uncertainty. "Why do we need to glue ourselves to you, Vin? What's really going on?" His cousin scanned the darkened perimeter before leaning in, his voice a harsh whisper. "Donnie and I got sent for by guys in Canarsie. We gotta sit down tomorrow night with Sal and 'em," he said nonchalantly. "It's stirred up because some of our people were involved with Nicky in this drug thing. Nicky wasn't with Sal, but no doubt the old guy knew about the operation. And now some of his crew have been sniffing around our people, asking about the kid and all that there." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "It's a precautionary meeting, mostly to see what we know, not directly accusing us. Yet." Frankie and Tony exchanged anxious glances. The implications were serious. Mafia sit-downs, even precautionary ones, could quickly spiral out of control. Vinny continued. "Like I told you, we're gonna spin Nicky's death and make it seem like a drug hit. That way the heat doesn't fall on you guys." The trio nodded, absorbing the plan, but their faces remained etched with doubt. Jack's voice was laced with skepticism. "And you think Sal's gonna buy that?" "Look, I'm not saying it's foolproof, but it's what we got. And it's another reason you guys need to stay close. Out there, on the streets. I can't watch your back if you're off doing your own thing," Vinny said, his tone firm, almost commanding. His allure of protection was tempting, yet Jack, Frankie, and Tony knew the dangers of being on record with a man like him. It meant deeper involvement in his world, a world of shadowed deals and constant danger. His offer hung in the air, sinister yet seductive. "I've got some collections over the next few days. You help out, you get paid, and it keeps you under my protection." Reluctantly, Frankie and Tony agreed to assist with the collections. "We'll help with the jobs, Vin. It's the least we can do," Frankie stated, the firmness in his voice belying his underlying fear. Vinny nodded, a half-smile flickering under the dim streetlight. "Fair enough. You boys want to ride downtown? Grab a drink to shake off this chill?" Tony shook his head, stepping back toward the relative safety of the street. "Nah, we're good. We'll head out." He looked at Jack. "You coming?" Jack hesitated, then shook his head. "I'll catch a ride with Vinny." After a tense farewell, Frankie and Tony disappeared into the night, leaving Jack and Vinny alone. They headed to Vinny's car, his vehicle an older model, nondescript, blending into the night like a predator at rest. As Vinny drove, the city passed by in a blur of neon and streetlights, the car a bubble of strained silence before he eventually spoke up. "You know, Johnny, being with us isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving. You stick with me. I make sure you're looked after." Jack listened, the city's pulse melding with his own racing heart. The night wrapped around them, a cloak woven with the threads of risk and opportunity. Vinny's words were persuasive, his confidence almost infectious. But the shadows that danced across his face with each passing streetlight revealed the dual nature of his promises, protection laced with peril. "You could do a lot worse than having someone like me watching your back," he added, his tone smooth as the car wove through the darker veins of Brooklyn. Jack sat back, the leather of the seat cool against his skin, his thoughts a tangled mess. Vinny's world was dangerous, yes, but it was also powerful. And in a life that had handed him few victories, the allure of power was a potent seduction. The drive continued, the car a moving confessional, the cityscape a shifting witness to Jack's internal battle. As they stopped at a red light, Jack finally turned to Vinny, the streetlight casting deep shadows across his face. "And if I say yes, what happens then?" Vinny's smile was slow and knowing. "Then we make sure you're one of us, truly one of us. And Johnny, that's a promise you can count on." The light turned green, and they drove on, deeper into the night, toward a future uncertain but unmistakably charged with the potential for both ascent and downfall. Chapter 5. The Fabricated Truth. Jack had never been to a sit-down, but even without being present, he could imagine what it must have been like. Grim faces, clipped tones, and unspoken threats. He wasn't there, of course. No one in his position would be. The meeting between Sal and Vinny over Nicky Giordano's death was happening miles away, in another neighborhood in Brooklyn. He had only heard the small details from Vinny prior to it, and now, Jack sat in a small bar in Bensonhurst, nursing a drink, his mind racing over what could be unfolding at that very moment. The sit-down was held in Lorenzo's, a small, dimly lit bar tucked away in a quiet corner in Canarsie, in a territory held by Lucchese's. That crew had long used this bar for delicate meetings, where tensions could be diffused under their watchful eye. The choice of venue was no accident. Neutral ground where both sides could feel somewhat secure, knowing they had organized the meeting to mediate between the two representatives from Bensonhurst. Vinny had been summoned to this sit-down after rumors began swirling that members of his crew might have been involved in the death of Nicky Giordano, the nephew of Sal Giordano, a feared and respected captain from their area. Vinny wasn't alone and was accompanied to this meeting by his skipper, Donald Riccardi, because together they planned to craft a story, one that would protect Vinny's cousin Jack, and keep them all from the violent wrath of Sal. The lie had already been rehearsed in their minds, every word carefully selected to deflect suspicion. Across from them sat Sal Giordano, his sharp, piercing eyes watching every movement, every word that left the lips of Donnie and Vinny with a predator's precision. At the head of the table sat Carlo Fontana, a captain from Canarsie with a reputation for keeping the peace in situations like these. Carlo was the mediator, a man whose word was respected across all the families. And tonight, his role was to ensure things didn't get out of hand. His presence was the only thing keeping the tension in the room from boiling over. The Luccheses were good at keeping the peace. They valued money above all else, and understood that a war between these families would be bad for business all around. Still, mediation or not, everyone knew what was at stake here. If Sal walked away unconvinced, there could be blood in the streets by tomorrow morning. The sit-down began with formal pleasantries, but it wasn't long before the conversation shifted to the topic everyone had been avoiding. Sal was the first to speak. "Anyway, you know why we're here," he said, leaning forward slightly, his voice low and menacing. "My nephew is dead, and word on the street is that you guys had something to do with it." Vinny could feel the weight of Donnie's presence beside him. He hadn't said a word yet, but his silence was loud. It was the kind of silence that made men uneasy. He had rehearsed his story 100 times over in his head, but sitting across from Sal, he knew there was no room for error. "Listen," Vinny began, keeping his voice calm, respectful. "We know how close Nicky was to you, and we're sorry for your loss. But you've got it wrong. We had nothing to do with it." Sal's eyes narrowed. "That's not what I've heard. And I know you've heard the same rumors I have. Nicky was pushing your product, and I know you guys went to collect. Now he turns up dead. Tell me that doesn't seem suspicious." He knew this was coming. He had prepared for this exact line of questioning. "It's true we were involved with Nicky with a few deals, but that doesn't mean we had anything to do with that. We heard whispers that it was a rival of his, some punks from East New York. They've been running around for weeks. The shootings? You've heard the stories, Sal." The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Vinny's face. "East New York, huh? That's a convenient story." "It's no story," Donnie finally spoke, his voice smooth, but the edge of authority unmistakable. "If we had something to do with his death, I wouldn't be sitting here now, telling you we didn't. We know how these things work. You think I'd let one of my men act without my approval? This isn't how we do business, Sal." The room went silent. Sal studied Riccardi for a long moment, searching for a crack in the story. The representative from the Lucchese family sat quietly, his eyes darting between the two captains. "And yet," Sal finally said, "my nephew is dead, and I'm hearing a lot of talk that points back to your family." His expression didn't change. "Talk is talk, Sal. But you need evidence if you're going to accuse us of something like this. You don't have it because we didn't do it. But I understand your position. You want answers, and you deserve them. What I'm telling you is that if you want to find who's responsible for Nicky's death, you need to look elsewhere." Sal clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists on the table. He didn't want to believe them, but without evidence, there was nothing he could do. Even in the Mafia world, you couldn't just start a war without cause. It was bad for business, and the last thing Sal needed was to draw unwanted attention from the law. After what felt like an eternity, the representative from the Lucchese family cleared his throat. "We've all lost people," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But unless there's proof, we can't escalate this. No one wants a war, and no one wants the feds sniffing around because we can't keep our houses in order." Sal's eyes flickered with anger, but he nodded slowly. "You're right. No one wants a war." Vinny exhaled slowly, relief flooding his veins. It wasn't over yet, but they had bought themselves some time. Donnie stood, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. "Not for nothing, Sal, but I got a lot of respect for you. You and my Uncle Ray go way back to the 60s, right?" he said, attempting to soften the situation. "We'll put some of our people on it. Find out what happened to this nephew of yours." Sal stood as well, though his expression remained hard. "You better hope I don't find out it was one of yours, Donnie. Because if I do—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The threat was clear. Donnie nodded, his face unreadable. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Sal was 74 years old, yet a sharp and seasoned figure in the Gambino regime, having spent decades dodging indictments and steering clear of informants like they were the plague. Despite his age, he commanded immense respect from everyone around him. Donnie, a relatively young captain by comparison, and Vinny, who was even slightly younger than him, both held Sal in high regard. The old-timer's toughness, experience, and ability to survive in a world that had taken down so many earned him a level of respect that few could match or hope to reach. With that, the meeting was over. The Lucchese representative called it to a close, and Vinny and Donnie left the neighborhood with the weight of suspicion still hanging over them. But for now, they had escaped without penalty. Hours later, Vinny sat across from Jack in the back room at Rocco's. Jack could feel the tension in the air, though his cousin's face betrayed little. He hadn't wanted to press Vinny for details immediately after the sit-down, but now, as the silence dragged on, Jack couldn't hold back any longer. "So?" he probed, his voice tight with anticipation. "What happened?" Vinny took a long sip of his drink before speaking. "It's done. For now." "What do you mean, for now?" He set his glass down, his expression serious but calm. Sal still suspects us. That much is clear. He's still sharp, the old guy. But there's no proof. And without proof, he can't make a move. Donnie and I sold him a story. Told him one of Nicky's rivals might have done him in. Jack swallowed hard, his stomach churning with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. So, did he buy it even a little bit? Vinny shrugged. He doesn't have much choice. The Lucchese's were there to keep the peace, and without evidence, Sal's hands are tied. But he's not stupid. He'll keep digging. So we're good then? For now, yeah. But you need to keep your head down. Sal's not going to forget this, and if anything else happens, he'll be back. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Relief washed over him, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this wasn't over. Still, for now, they were safe. He stood up and pulled Vinny into a tight hug. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. I know it couldn't have been easy." Vinny patted him on the back, though his expression remained serious. "That's what family's for, Johnny. But don't think for a second that this means you're out of the woods. Sal didn't make it this far in life being Joe Jerkoff. No loose lips, all right?" Jack nodded, though the relief still lingered. For the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe again. The weight of Nicky's death, while still heavy, didn't feel like it was about to crush him anymore. In the weeks that followed the sit-down, Jack, Frankie, and Tony were somewhat loosely integrated into Donnie's crew, under Vinny. His cousin worked diligently to keep them honest on the streets, and now Jack was ready to return the favor by proving his loyalty to Vinny and Donnie, of the Colombos. The three of them were quickly put to work, handling collections, enforcing payments, and keeping an eye on businesses in their part of Brooklyn. It was easy work for the most part, but it was the kind that earned respect in the world they had tried so hard to avoid. And for Jack, it was a way to show Vinny and Donnie that he wasn't just some kid playing at being a gangster. He was all in now, for better or worse. One night, Jack, Frankie, and Tony were sent to collect money from a strip club that had been late on its payments for weeks. It was a well-known spot in Bensonhurst, a place where the owners knew the score, but had recently started dragging their feet. Vinny didn't tolerate disrespect, and neither did Donnie. It was time to send a message. As the three friends entered the dimly lit club, the pounding bass of the music and the haze of cigarette smoke hit them like a wall. The place was packed, dancers on stage, men throwing money, and a few business types huddled in the back booths, conducting deals that had nothing to do with the girls on stage. Jack spotted the owner near the bar, talking to a couple of regulars. He was a scrawny guy named Marco, who had always been a little too slick for his own good. Jack didn't waste any time. He walked straight up to him, Frankie and Tony flanking him like always. "Marco," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Time to pay what you owe." Marco turned, his face blanching when he saw who it was. "Jack, hey, listen. I've been meaning to get the money together. It's just been—" Jack cut him off. "We don't care about excuses, Marco. You know how this works." Marco glanced nervously at the customers in the bar, clearly not wanting to make a scene. "Look, I'll have it by tomorrow. I swear. Just give me a little more time." Frankie stepped forward, grabbing Marco by the collar and slamming him against the bar. "Tomorrow's not good enough." The bar went silent. All eyes were on the scene unfolding in front of them, but no one moved to intervene. This was how things worked in Brooklyn. If you didn't pay, you paid in other ways. Tony leaned in close, his voice low and dangerous. "You think Donnie's going to let this slide? You think Vinny's going to just forget about this?" Marco's hands trembled as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a stack of cash. "Here, take it. It's all I've got right now." Jack took the money, counting it quickly before slipping it into his jacket. "Next time, don't make us come here. Pay on time." Marco nodded, his face pale. I will, I swear." Without another word, the three of them turned and left the club, leaving Marco to stew in his own fear. It wasn't pretty, but it was necessary. This was the life they were walking into. Another job came a few days later. This time, it was a drug dealer who had been selling product on Donnie's territory. Jack, Frankie, and Tony were sent to extort him, to make sure he knew that if he was going to operate on their turf, he needed to pay for the privilege. They cornered him in an alley behind a bar, another scrawny guy with a twitchy demeanor and a mouth that moved faster than his brain. "You've been selling on our turf," Frankie said, his tone deadly. "You know what that means, right?" The dealer, Luis, swallowed hard, his eyes darting between the three of them. I didn't know, man. I swear. Jack stepped forward next, trying to overwhelm the dealer. "You don't operate here without paying for it. You want to keep selling, you pay us. Understand?" Luis nodded quickly. Yeah, I understand. I'll pay. How much?" "Half," Jack said flatly. "Every week." The dealer's eyes widened. "Half? That's—" Before he could finish, Frankie grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "Half, or you find somewhere else to sell." Luis nodded frantically. Okay, half, I'll pay." Jack stared at him for a long moment before stepping back. "We'll be back next week for the first payment. Don't be late." They left the dealer trembling in the alley, knowing that their message had been received loud and clear. This was how things were done. There was no room for negotiation, no room for weakness, and Jack, Frankie, and Tony were starting to understand that more and more every day. It wasn't long before Donnie began to take notice of the work Jack and his friends were doing. Their efficiency and dedication hadn't gone unnoticed, and one evening, Vinny called them down to Donnie's social club in Bensonhurst for a meeting. The club was an old, unassuming building tucked away on a quiet street. From the outside, it looked like any other neighborhood hangout, but inside, it was where real business was done. It was a place where decisions were made, alliances were formed, and lives were changed. Vinny had warned them before the meeting. Donnie's a quiet man. He's not one for small talk, and he doesn't give out compliments easily. But when he does, it means something. Keep your mouth shut unless he asks you something. He's sharp, and he's decisive. Don't mess this up. Jack, Frankie, and Tony entered the club with a mixture of nerves and excitement. They had been working hard to prove themselves, and now they were about to sit down with the man who controlled their part of Bensonhurst. Donald Riccardi was seated at a small table in the back, a glass of wine in front of him, his eyes sharp and calculating as they entered. Vinny led the way, motioning for the three of them to sit. "Hey, Donnie," Vinny said respectfully. "These are the boys I've been telling you about. They've been doing good work." Donnie's eyes shifted to Jack, Frankie, and Tony, and for a moment, none of them dared to breathe. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. "I've heard good things," he said, his gaze sweeping over them. "Vinny tells me you've been handling the collections and extorting the dealers on our turf. You've done well." Jack felt a surge of pride, though he kept his face neutral. "I appreciate loyalty," he continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And I appreciate men who get things done. Keep doing what you're doing, and there will be more opportunities for you." Frankie, unable to contain himself, grinned. "Thank you, Donnie. Means a lot." His lips twitched in the slightest hint of a smile, though his expression remained serious. "Good. Loyalty and hard work are rewarded in this life. Keep proving yourselves, and who knows? One day, you might be sitting where I'm sitting." Was he saying what Jack thought he was saying? Was he hinting that they could one day become made men? Donnie was more of an inspiration than anything else. Of course, he had made his bones on the streets. But what was really impressive about him was that he is the youngest active capo in New York. Vinny told Jack that Donnie got made into the Colombos when he was only 24 years old and was made a captain at the tender age of 30. That was truly unheard of in the mob underworld, but only goes on to show how different he was to the average and why the boys held him in such regard. However, Vinny hinted that nepotism played a part in this also, as Donnie has an Uncle Ray, who was the family's underboss for nearly 50 years up until his retirement. Donnie leaned back in his chair, his gaze resting on Jack. "Can you drive?" Jack almost choked on his breath. "Yeah, sure, I can drive, Donnie. You need to go somewhere?" "I got a meeting up in East Harlem on Friday. You're gonna drive me, kid." Jack nodded quickly. "Sure, no problem." Donnie watched him for a moment, as if gauging how Jack handled the request. "All right, you guys get out of here. I want to talk to Vinny." The three friends exchanged quick glances before getting up from their chairs. Without a word, they left Donnie's social club, Old Palermo, a dark, smoky establishment known to those in the life as a place where serious business was conducted. It wasn't particularly flashy, but the name alone carried weight on the streets. Outside, the cool evening air greeted them, a stark contrast to the tension inside. The neon sign flickered above the door, casting a dull red glow over the sidewalk. Jack, Frankie, and Tony stood just outside the entrance, leaning against the brick wall of the building. Jack lit a cigarette, passing one to his friends, who accepted without hesitation. They watched as several of Donnie's men came and went from the club, getting into cars or standing around in small clusters, talking quietly. The sight was mesmerizing. This wasn't just some casual get-together. This was the life in motion. Men in sharp suits, flashing gold watches, smoking cigars as they exchanged subtle nods of respect. It was the underworld they'd always heard about, but were now standing on the edge of. At that moment, a sleek black Lincoln town car pulled up to the curb, and from it stepped a man the boys recognized immediately. Dominic "Tall Dom" Mancini, a wise guy known for his style and ruthlessness. He was in his 50s but looked like he was born in a suit. A thick cigar hung from the corner of his mouth, its end glowing red in the dim light. His eyes fell on Jack as he approached the club, pausing for a second and looking Jack over with a grin. "You're Johnny Boy, right?" Jack froze for a second, caught off guard by the recognition. "Yeah," he replied coolly, nodding, trying not to show the thrill that ran through him. Mancini chuckled, taking a puff of his cigar. "Vinny's cousin? From 86th Street. With that, he gave a small nod and disappeared inside the club, the heavy door swinging shut behind him. The moment he was gone, Frankie exhaled a deep breath and turned frantically towards the door's entrance. "That was Tall Dom, wasn't it? From Queens?" His voice was full of excitement, as if Mancini's acknowledgement alone had validated their entire existence. Tony grinned, flicking the ash off his cigarette. "Guy's a legend with the Bonanos, and he knows you by name." Jack tried to play it cool, shrugging as if it was no big deal, but inside, he was buzzing. The recognition, the respect. It was intoxicating. These were men he had only seen from a distance, guys who silently ran the streets, commanded fear. And now, one of them knew his name. The three of them stood there for a moment, smoking in silence, each one processing the gravity of what had just happened. A few weeks ago, they had been on the fence about getting involved in the life, hesitant about what it might mean for their futures. But now they were on the fast track. Donnie had chosen Jack to drive him. And now, a block legend like Dominic Mancini knew who he was. It was becoming clear that the deeper they went, the more they were getting pulled into the allure of the Mafia world. Frankie broke the silence again, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't know, man. Maybe this life isn't so bad after all. If we keep playing it right, there's no telling where we'll end up." Tony nodded, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Yeah, we'll be full-on wise guys soon. Driving for Donnie? That's huge. Who else gets a shot like that?" Jack didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. They were already hooked. The recognition, the respect, the power. It was everything they had ever wanted, but didn't know they could have. A few days later, Jack found himself behind the wheel of Donald Riccardi's Cadillac, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as they rolled through the streets of East Harlem. It was a cool autumn evening, the kind where the crisp air felt charged with the weight of something important. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city as Jack navigated the busy Manhattan streets. In the back seat sat Donnie, dressed sharply, as always, next to one of his most trusted soldiers, Ralph DeMarco, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a hard stare. Jack could feel their presence in the car, the quiet power that radiated from them as they spoke in low tones, discussing the evening's business. "You clear on everything, kid?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, I'll just wait in the car, right?" "Yeah," Donnie replied. "Just stay put, shouldn't take long." He pulled up not too far from a quiet building on a side street. The neighborhood was rough around the edges, but the building itself looked well kept. A few cars were parked nearby, and Jack could feel the weight of the moment settle over him as Donnie and Ralph stepped out of the car and headed towards the building. The streets were quiet, the occasional distant hum of traffic the only sound filling the cool night air. Jack leaned back in the driver's seat, staring out at the darkened streets of East Harlem. He had made it this far, hadn't he? Driving for a captain, sitting outside real mafia meetings. It was a far cry from the uncertainty he'd felt just weeks ago. It's amazing how quick things can change. His hands still gripped the steering wheel as he tried to shake off the nagging feeling of tiredness coupled with boredom. These meetings often dragged on, he thought. Donnie had said he wouldn't be long, but in this life, nothing was ever really on schedule. Jack stretched in his seat, glancing at the building again, then checked his phone. No new messages, no calls. An hour passed. Jack sighed, growing restless, and decided to step out of the car to stretch his legs. The night air was brisk against his skin as he lit a cigarette. He leaned against the car, taking a long drag as he scanned the area. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but nothing seemed out of place. Eventually he crushed the cigarette under his foot, flicking the butt to the side, and got back into the car. Once seated, he turned on the radio to distract himself. He found a station playing an old classic, something his father used to listen to. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel and even started to sing along softly, hoping to ease the brewing boredom. The song was soothing, a rare bit of comfort amidst the chaos of the streets, but it didn't last. His eyes kept flicking toward the building. Another hour passed. Jack's tolerance levels were truly testing, but this was a big part of the life, he realized, sitting around, waiting, and doing nothing. He stepped out of the car again, lighting another cigarette, his hands shaking to the chill of the air. Jack blew out a long stream of smoke, his eyes darting toward the building again. Maybe they were just wrapping things up in there. Unable to take it any longer, he walked toward the entrance, his instincts beginning to warn him of something amiss. Jack approached one of the windows, trying to peer inside, but the windows were blacked out, either boarded up or covered from within. He couldn't see anything. He stood there for a moment, staring at the building's cold, impenetrable surface. What the hell was taking so long? With his nerves on edge, he retreated back to the car, tossing the cigarette onto the ground as he slid into the driver's seat. His fingers fumbled as he pulled out his phone and dialed Vinny. The phone rang twice before Vinny's voice came through, calm but cautious. "Johnny? How you doing, kid?" Jack tried to keep his voice steady. "I'm all right. Just waiting around. I dropped Donnie and Ralph off at the meeting spot in East Harlem. They've been in there for 2 hours, though. Is that normal?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Jack could hear Vinny thinking, weighing his words carefully. "Meetings can go long sometimes," he replied slowly. "But usually not this long. What did Donnie tell you when you got there?" Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "He said it wouldn't be long. Something about a gambling operation with some Genovese people." Another silence stretched between them. This one longer than the first. Jack could hear Vinny breathing on the other end. "All right," he finally said, his voice carrying a hint of tension now. "Get back in the car. I'll call you back in a few." The call ended abruptly, leaving Jack staring at the darkened screen of his phone. His anxiety spiked now, creeping up his spine like ice. He slid the phone into his jacket pocket and lit another cigarette, but this time, the smoke didn't calm him. He stood outside the car, pacing slowly on the sidewalk as he waited for Vinny's call. 5 minutes passed, though it felt like an eternity, before the phone buzzed in Jack's pocket again. He answered quickly, ducking into the car to avoid being overheard. "Vinny?" "I tried calling both Donnie and Ralph." No answer. Jack felt his stomach drop. What does that mean? It means they're probably too busy solving world hunger or negotiating peace treaties to pick up the phone, he said with a heavy hint of sarcasm. "What?" "It means you need to get the hell out of there. Now, come back to Brooklyn." There was an unmistakable edge in Vinny's voice now. Jack's hands shook as he fumbled with the keys, starting the engine. His heart raced and a cold sweat formed at the back of his neck. "Are they okay? What do you think happened there?" "I don't know, kid. I don't know," Vinny replied. "Just come back to Brooklyn, and don't stop for nothing." Jack didn't wait to argue or ask more questions. He hit the gas, pulling away from the curb and tearing down the street, his mind racing faster than the car as he made his way out of East Harlem. Something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. And now he was speeding away, not knowing if Donnie and Ralph would ever walk out of that building alive.